Hello, everybody, and welcome to SBI's Reigniting Small Business Podcast. I'm Patrick Lee, and I'm here with Laura Richards. And today, we decided that we were going to take sort of a look back at the effects that the pandemic and the lockdown or close down or whatever we're calling it has the effect it's had on us. And we were especially interested in this whole concept of the death of brick and mortar. Right, we're never going back to that model, and how all of a sudden we're starting to hear a whole lot of conversation talking very differently about that.
So, Patrick, I think it's interesting because when the pandemic first started, we all were appreciating the ability to work from home and how productive we could be. We didn't have to have an hour commute to the office. We were regaining a couple hours of our lives. We didn't know how long it was going to be for, so we were just really thinking that this productivity was something that we were going to be able to maintain for a long period of time. And I've been hearing from my colleagues, I'm interested to hear what you've been hearing from the folks you're talking to. There's a lot of Zoom fatigue, a lot of burning out, a lot of COVID brain, and we can get into the technical definitions of all of these terms, and that people are really missing that face-to-face office culture, and they want it back.
And what's interesting, because so I tend to be somebody who I get so much human interaction and stimuli from what I do as a job, right? I'm interacting with people constantly, and I actually am an introvert. Like, I charge my battery by being left alone. So I felt like this was perfect for me. Like, I don't need people. I don't need to leave my house now. This is great. And what became really apparent is how small interactions count as true social interactions at a level that I don't think we even understand. Like, just talking to somebody in the grocery line, or seeing somebody at a store, or just those small interactions. It's like, it's amazing how isolated you do end up feeling, and how I would like to just go someplace, have a margarita, and be waited on by waitstaff that was friendly. That would make my day.
You and I have talked about this on other podcasts, and I really relish the fact that I live in a downtown environment. So when I walk the dog in the morning, I see people. So even if I'm working on Zoom and via remote, connectivity, I still see other human beings. But it's mitigated by the fact that we all have our masks on. All you can see is people's eyes. Sometimes they look like they're smiling. They're a little squinted on the edges. And, you kind of communicate through each other's dogs, but even then you don't want to let them get too close because your leash is 3 feet and their leash is 3 feet. But when we're talking about connectivity with human beings, a lot of times we're talking about those small exchanges in the workplace that give you grand ideas, whether it's in the kitchen, making your cup of coffee in the morning, the old water cooler thing. There's an exchange and a flow of ideas that happen in a work environment that isn't happening now, or has to happen differently. So you had some experiences with how people were, I don't want to say manufacturing those opportunities, but what are some of the things that you're seeing in terms of your clients?
Well, I think one of the things that's important to emphasize on what you just said is that, we think that our work happens when we're doing the work, and then when we have the communication happens when we're having the meeting or the call. But that interstitial communication is so important, and it's ideas coming from unexpected places, and people weighing in on something that they're not necessarily part of, but they overheard this, or an idea because you're being told a story and you're like, oh my gosh, that solves this. Those interactions play far more of a role. And I have a friend, a very good friend of mine. I've known her for, 40 years. And she's been employed in a organization that has been remote for years. I mean, like, when it was all conference call, right? We didn't have Zoom, we didn't have any of this. She was on conference calls. And that company did a really unique thing. They recognized that most of their employees were not going to interact face to face hardly ever. Maybe once a year at a company conference or something, but essentially they were not going to see each other. So they built in forced communication. So they'd have a weekly call between this group of folks, and even if there was a formal agenda, they would hold you to making that call happen and just having a discussion. Nothing's going on. Let's just talk about, how last week went, or what, small talk. And then they would have various meetings laid out that they would force to happen, even if folks were like, we don't have time for that. And that included even that like happy hour thing. Like they would say, okay, every other Friday from 3 to 5, we're doing basically a remote happy hour, well before we ever had the term remote happy hour, in order to try to make these interactions start happening where people are just flowing back and forth and having those, non-specific communicative things, getting to know each other. And it became so normalized with that company that's part of the culture. They work remotely. They've done it for years. They do it very well. And they all feel like they know each other. Some of them never met face to face ever.
I think that's incredible. I can also understand how that works. And we were talking about a client of yours the other day, and that their workforce is distributed all over the world. And so you have to find these moments, whether they're, happy hours. There's some games now that you can play as a group of people online. So some of these different social things, so that it's not all about just talking about work, because as we've mentioned, sometimes after all day of being on a screen, your brain synapses are not firing correctly. You feel like you're not making sense. You just need to exercise your brain in a different way. And I think in order to come up with these, adaptive, innovative, creative solutions that we're always saying are necessary to figure out how to navigate the pandemic and change your business, you're going to have to try new things and doing things in new ways.
Well, I think in the examples that we're talking about, and the example you gave of the company that's all around the world, there still was this, there's a group of folks in this country, there's a group of folks in this office, there's a group of folks over here. So even if the whole company's not grouped, there are groupings. The sort of unique thing about what's happening today is we're all solo. Like we're in our house, in our office, every one of us. So it's way too individualized. So when we're talking about like how that stuff happens, what happens when you get on a call and you Zoom call, we call all 6 of these people together, we're going to brainstorm. Now, in person, a lot of things happen of a facial expression here, this over here, somebody, and those folks who are introverts, they're waiting their time, or they start writing stuff down and the facilitator sees that. So they say, well, what are you thinking? And it forces that interaction. A lot of times on these Zoom calls, you end up with the leader saying a bunch of stuff, calling on this person, missing that signal over there. This person's, internet isn't working that well. And we end up in that weird thing where we kind of got the gist of what this meeting was, but we didn't really get the gist of it. We didn't get anywhere with it. And so, how do we overcome that? And Zoom fatigue, the easy answer is get better with Zoom. But we've all gotten really good with Zoom. I know things about Zoom now that I never imagined, and it has not solved these problems. Right? It's created its own set of problems.
I agree. And I think the thing that you're really missing is you're looking at things one-dimensionally and not three-dimensionally. Things like body language. We understand each other by so many more things than just the words that we say. And even on Zoom, you can't tell exactly where people's eyes are looking. Are they looking at their phone, or are they looking at you because you don't know how your camera's angled? There's a lot of communication that gets lost. So we're focusing so much harder to get the message that we lose a lot of these other cues. But one of the things that I wanted to bring to bear in this dialogue today is how can we use technology to keep us more integrated, and to work through some of these issues about being isolated. And we can talk about networking events. We can talk about how we're getting our message out to clients and customers in new ways, and just mitigating some of that not face-to-face stuff.
And there's a lot of talk about, there's tips out there right now. It was funny because my father was passing along some tips to me watching a podcast, right? Because I generally like to talk a lot with my hands, okay? And I'm doing this a lot. Well, he said, well, if your hands are out here and you're doing this, it's not the same as if you're doing this. So keep your arms and hands within the framework of your picture, right? Well, who would ever, here we go. Who would ever think of that? Like, what does that even mean? So I think there's a lot of tips about how to use this technology, and I've seen folks use it better. Like I have a lot of millennials who work with me, and they don't have this issue the same way that we have this issue. I mean, they're very used to the technology and the communication almost being synonymous, and it's a lot more of a flow. But even they are suffering from this too, because it's true that they get the technology and how to use it, but the exchange changes. It changes a lot. And I'll give an example of that. I facilitate a lot of groups, and I do a lot of one-to-ones with the group members. So I'm one-to-one with them, and then we all end up in a group and we have a conversation. I've figured out that Zoom actually is a very nice substitute for my one-to-ones. I'm looking right at that person. They're looking at me. Yes, there's some technology snafus here and there with Wi-Fi or something, but essentially we are interacting appropriately. It's a good substitute for in-person. It's probably exactly the same. The group thing does not work that way. I find that trying to feel the energy, I can feel the energy in a room. I can tell where things are going. I can maneuver like, ooh, that person hasn't spoken. Somebody over here has an issue. There's a reading of that room that is important. I have not figured out how to do it on Zoom. There may be some folks out there who think it's great and it's easy. I haven't witnessed it done by anybody. I can't do it. And when the limited amount of times I've done some of these open-ended group togethers, it feels awkward. It doesn't, you don't know why that person decided to speak, or is that person now bored and they're off somewhere. You just can't do it on Zoom. So I think we have some of the tools right now. We've discovered some of the ways to go with this, but I also think that there's a lot more to discover here, and we got to get creative. And I know you were talking about how, I was asking you, well, how is this networking stuff working? Like, how are people finding new people? What's working with that? And you were talking about how the whole social media thing was working for you, and what did that look like?
I'm really impressed with what I'm seeing going on Facebook, business-oriented wise. We have a local leading ladies group that has a Facebook group, and watching people lift each other up and promote new businesses and talk about folks in the community that are helping them with certain business situations. And it's authentic networking that's happening, although not face-to-face. And that seems to be really effective for the people who are they have to be hyper aware about adding value. Just like when you're in a networking situation, if you're someone who's only there to walk away with business cards in your pocket and you're not adding value by thinking about who should be connected with each other, ultimately you're probably not going to be a very successful networker. The exact same thing is true when you go to the social media platforms, making those introductions, knowing who would be good to meet someone else, looking out, being aware, and then also opportunistically offering your help when it's relevant, when it's not too self-promotional, but actually it's value added. So seeing people use that wisely is great. I've heard from some folks that they're doing, local chamber events and local networking events online, and I'd love to hear from some of them what their experiences are. There's also a plethora these days of online educational webinar resources from all different small business community organizations, government organizations, and small businesses. So there are a ton of tools out there.
And there are tools that we're all used to using. The Zoom, like we need to put ourselves in some sort of interaction mode, and then we have our Trello or our Teamwork or some of these project management tools and all. But there are also some interesting tools out there that sort of bridge the gap. There's one tool I know of. It's called Mural.ly, Mural.ly, and it's actually like a pin board for if we were all in a conference room and we were writing up on a whiteboard and we were doing this stuff. It allows folks to interact idea-wise. You can drop a video into the mural. You can drop an audio piece, a picture. You can write Post-it notes. And it's just this mishmash of creativity so people can chime in, and it's much more creative than a very linear, like put your note in, okay, here's the next note. And some folks, that creativity requires a little bit more chaos, a little bit more mind map type of format. And it's a very nice tool for that sort of thing. So I think there are tools that if we got them in combination with each other and got used to them, we could begin to put more creativity and innovation into our interactions.
I totally agree. I also think that we would be remiss in discussing this conversation and not talking a little bit about what the lack of, in-person office working environments, the loss of those has done to people in terms of, motivation, depression, lack of human contact wise. I think those are big.
Well, and remember, people are motivated. Their primary motivators can be very different. Some people are motivated by economics, some by power and authority. Some people are motivated by social, right, relationships and other. And there's a list of primary motivators that people are motivated by. Well, if your motivation is social, or even if your motivation is business doctrine or tradition, or even aesthetic, right? You're being stuck in your house. It is such a limiting factor to meeting your motivational needs that you're not generating any energy around that. It's one thing to be economically motivated and you're just watching your bottom line tick away and you can react to it. I can see that, but you're going to suffer if you need to interact with your clients. And you need to feel like you've solved that problem, and you need to do that in a real-time manner of, where you can feel it, you can absorb it. So I think that's problematic. I think on another level too, let's look at this whole thing. We started out, and when this happened, everybody freaked out, right? There's fear. We're all scared, like what's going to happen here, and that fear was a motivator. So we all went home, we got our masks, we learned what this was about. We started like staying focused on our business and we're going to make this work. And that fear drove us for a little while. But fear is a short-term motivator. Once the fear itself has subsided a little and it's become anxiety, right? You're no longer being driven by that fear. Now you're kind of looking around, you're getting a little bored, you're getting COVID brain, you're getting depressed. You need passion and persistence to take over, because passion is a long-term motivator. But we don't have a passion for any of this. I mean, we have a passion to survive, but that's not really a passion, right? We don't want any of this. So once the fear's gone, this becomes just a beat down in the doldrums. You're like, how much longer is this going to go on? What's the next bad impact that it's going to have on me?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. So what's the recommendation then? How do we put ourselves back into passion mode when we know that, in order for us to survive this thing, we have to be persistent through the long haul. We all got into our businesses, most of us, because the passion was there. How do you reignite it when you're not really feeling it? And is it about reaching out for those connections possibly to help you do that?
No, I think a lot of it is mindfulness, right? I mean, a lot of this is, look, the thing that's driving you down is anxiety. Like, we don't know what's going to happen next. Right. So instead of focusing on the unknown and letting it gnaw at you and worrying about it and just getting in that anxiety soup, that's a demotivator. Nothing's happening there. This has the potential, as we've said many times on these podcasts, this is a reset button. It's a forced reset. You couldn't get out of your own way. You couldn't stop your bad habits. This has given you a reset. If you don't sit here and wallow in your lack of knowing what's next and being scared, but not scared enough for it to be a motivator, just scared enough for it to paralyze you, that's the worst thing. If you get mindful and you say, okay, we got a chance to innovate, be creative, adapt. We don't necessarily know how this is working, but we're gonna go ahead and stay positive in the moment, redesigning. We'll react when that thing comes, if it comes, but we're not gonna sit here and just worry about it and just stare endlessly. It's that whole thing. Get away from watching the headlines. Get away from watching those numbers tick. What are they telling you? Okay, if you came back 2 weeks from now not having seen them, would it have made a difference that you didn't see those, right? How do you put yourself in a mindful space to work on your agenda and have the outlook you need to have to be productive?
Well said. So I think, to summarize, we don't think traditional workspaces are going anywhere. Ultimately, they'll probably come back, but it's going to be some time. So in the meantime, collect yourself, find your motivation, find your way forward, use some of the tools that we've recommended, and proceed.
Proceed. That's the main thing. Keep proceeding. All right, everybody.
Thanks everybody for being here for SBI's Reigniting Small Business Podcast. We'll see you again on Tuesday.
Bye.